This is your demonstration for how to measure your grid on the final draft. So number one, you want a clean surface. I did wipe down my table. Number two, you want clean hands. I did wash my hands. And number three, if you stand up, your grid turns out better. So stand up. All right. For this ruler, you want to deal with the inch side that has less lines on it. So this is upside down. I apologize for you, but it says inch. That's the side we're dealing with. The first little line right next to the I for inch is actually 0. So it's not the edge of the ruler, it's the first little line. We're going to do a 1.5 inch grid over the whole entire paper. So I'm going to line it up and I'm going to do 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12. So there is a slide that goes along with this. The inch is divided into 16ths. If you need to count the lines, it's the 8th line past the number. So for the 1, let me flip this around. Let me grab another sheet of paper for you. So 0 is this line. The inch mark is the big line to the right of the number, which is here. So it's the big line just to the right of it. And that's true whatever inch mark you have. So even like the 9, it's that big line to the right of the number. The ½ inch, the line is slightly longer. So for 1.5, the middle is slightly longer here. And on the Google slide, there are arrows pointing to the measurements. So you just want to make sure that you're starting with 0, which is the first line on the side of the ruler. So I made my marks all the way through 12, and I'm on the long side of my paper. So then I'm going to move the ruler and put the 0 mark on the line I just made, and I'll start again. So 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, and 7.5. I'm going to just slide my ruler down, slide my paper up. I'm going to do that all along the bottom as well. Or this is backwards because of the webcam. So along the top or bottom. So 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12. Slide my ruler over, line 0 up with the 12-inch mark. 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5. Okay, so since this paper is longer than your ruler, you're going to do a series of little tally mark guidelines in the center. So since this is now going to be in the center of your final draft, you probably want them to be a little bit lighter. So roughly center, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to go much lighter because these will get erased in the end. No one's going to know that you drew with a grid. Okay, so now it's time to do the grid lines to connect your dash lines. So the first two, I'm lining up my little dash line at the top here and in the middle. So I'm going to hold my pencil at the end like a wand, and I'm going to super lightly trace or slide my pencil along. So notice how light that line is. It should be extremely light. We don't want to see your grid all over this drawing. Okay, so then I'm going to line up my ruler again with the center little guideline and the bottom one. And you want to like line it up and then double check before you make your mark. So we're going to do that to all of our lines. And so yes, you're lining up your little measured guidelines to create straight lines. So you really do need to pay attention. Like, am I lining them up? Lined up, double check, okay. And you want really light grid lines. It's part of your craftsmanship grade. We don't want to see the grid. We don't want people to know that you cheated in drawing a little bit. People are just going to believe that we are amazing artists, and we're going to let them believe that. And that starts with you drawing your grid lines super lightly, super lightly. And if you make a mistake, then you can erase it more easily. Also, if you make a horrible mistake measuring, just flip it over and use the back side. You do have one extra piece of this paper in case you mess up in the micrography like terribly. But for the most part, we don't have time to like start all over again. So we're gonna try to fix any mistakes and kind of layer a little bit and double check and layer a little bit more and double check to avoid making a lot of mistakes. So again, if you mess up measuring, just flip it over, start new. If you mess up with the micrography, you do have one extra piece of paper. It's the biggest size in your sets of paper. So this paper is 21 by 15. Once we draw the grid, you are going to have a border already on here, and we're going to use it for labeling, and you'll also use it for your nomenclature or your name and period. And then, so since we're back to using white paper, but this time, like some of the white paper is going to show, you do have to be careful about washing your hands before you start, not touching it in the center. Like, you'll have a border to touch it with. So we're kind of going back to some of the things you learned in Art 1-2. Okay, so be careful so your paper doesn't bend over the table, or whatever surface you're working on. So again, I'm going to line up the ruler on that first little line. So some of the ruler's hanging off. So I want 1.5, 3, 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12. And if you're not here, you can always pause, come back, pick up where I am. Okay, so then I'm going to slide my ruler over, and I really only need to do is make one more mark for 1.5 inches on the short side. So your paper is probably not perfectly 21 by 15. The paper cutter is slightly off. Your teacher is slightly off. So there is a little bit of error, but it's going to be in the border, so it's not going to matter. All right, so somewhere in the middle, I'm going to do the same, making sure I'm lining up with the 0 mark, not the edge of the ruler. So that first little tiny, or that first bigger line is 1 inch. 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12. Slide your ruler over, line up 12 with 0, and do one more measurement mark. All right, then I'm gonna scoop my paper and do it at the bottom, which looks like the top to you. 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12. So make sure that when you're making your marks in the middle of the paper, they're super light. You don't want to see little tally marks all over whatever it is you're going to draw. Okay, so now I would just move this so it's more comfortable. This is kind of a big piece. So move it so you're comfortable, but you're still going to line up the little dash lines. So I'm going to line up the ones here and in the center. So lining it up, double checking, holding my pencil in the middle, at the end, and gliding my ruler across. So I am still standing up. Yes, your back might hurt a little bit, but no pain, no gain. You need to have pain to have beautiful art, along with everything else. Okay, so the border is 1.5 inches. Your grid is 1.5 inches inside. And so each box on your plastic grid on top of your image is 1/2 inch. So you are enlarging like 6 times the size of that photo. That's size 4x6 in your Google Doc. If you happen to have a yardstick at home, like a wooden yardstick from like Home Depot, the big long wooden rulers that are 3 foot long, a yard, you can use a yardstick for this if you have it. Like I have a yardstick at home, but some people might, especially if you do home renovation. Okay, I'm trying to keep my lines really, really light. Okay, so our next step after this is to label the grid exactly how the image is labeled with the plastic grid. Okay, so before labeling, we're going to put an X in all 4 corners. So I'm going to put an X, 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 X. Nothing happens in those boxes. All right, so if this were a horizontal image, so it's wider than it is tall, I want to label it just like my horizontal image. So I want my 1 to be up here because my 1 is here. Actually, let me flip this around for you. I'll go upside down. You can have it right side up. So my numbers are along the long side. So I'm going to number in each box at the top, and I'm going to letter along the sides. And I'm going to do this all the way around. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think to write backwards, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so then along the side, I'm going to go A through H. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Okay, there we go. I would also letter the other side and number the bottom, so you have to keep looking all around to see what box you're in. So I'll show you an example of that one. All right, so that's horizontal. So you want it to match your image. So it's numbered along the long side at the top, numbered along the long side at the top on my grid as well. All right, so that's the horizontal version. For vertical, I already did a second one for vertical. Vertical, I have it numbered along the side, the long side. So I've numbered all along the long side 1 through 12, and I lettered along the short side, which is the top and the bottom. So notice how I have letters at the top and bottom, numbers on both sides, and then because this is vertical, my nomenclature would go on the bottom right. So I'm just gonna write okay. Annette Kramer, period 3 or 4, whichever period you are. And then I'll be able to see that when you send your photographs. Okay, make sure you keep your paper clean from here on out. You want to always wash your hands before touching your paper. You can touch the borders all that you want. And then you guys do have scratch paper in your bin. So before drawing, you might want to put scratch paper down. So especially if you wear lotion or you forget to wash your hands, you're trying to keep this paper nice and clean. Okay, good luck.